There's a reason religious faith is taught, not discovered. Children aren't born with beliefs in sacred texts or divine commandments. They inherit them, not through questioning, but through repetition. And that should tell us something. Any idea that only survives by being passed down unchallenged has something to fear from questions. Religion doesn't spread because of evidence. It spreads because of tradition, pressure, and often fear. When we start asking questions, religion starts shaking. Not because the questions are unfair, but because the answers don't hold up. Critical thinking isn't about attacking, it's about testing. And when we test religious ideas the way we test every other claim, they don't survive. That's not an attack on anyone's right to believe, but it is a fact worth facing. The foundation of critical thinking is simple. We ask, what is the claim? What's the evidence? Does it make sense? Can it be tested? Religion fails at every step. Take miracles. We're asked to believe that supernatural events happened long ago, were witnessed by very few, written down decades later, and then passed through centuries of translation and politics. And when we ask for evidence, we're told, have faith. But faith isn't a method for finding out what's true. It's what you use when you have no method. If someone told you they saw a man turn water into wine yesterday, you'd want proof. You'd ask who else saw it, where it happened, what evidence remains. And if they said, just believe me, you'd probably walk away. Yet, when the same story is thousands of years old, it's treated with reverence. The age of a story doesn't make it more trustworthy. It makes it harder to verify. But religion thrives on age, not accuracy. The older it is, the less we're allowed to question it. That's not how truth works. Critical thinking relies on doubt, not the cynical kind, but the careful kind. The kind that says, I could be wrong, so I'll look closer. Religion reverses that. It says you must believe without doubt. That's not strength. That's fragility. If your belief can't survive questioning, then it isn't strong. It's fragile and protected, like a myth wrapped in glass, too delicate to touch. We test medicine, we test physics, we test history, but religious claims are exempt. They sit outside the lab, outside the courtroom, outside the classroom, and demand special treatment. And if we ask why, the answer is always emotional. Because people find comfort in it, because it gives them meaning, because they were raised with it. But none of that makes it true. Comfort and truth are not the same thing. A warm blanket can still be a lie. Think about how religion answers big questions. Where did we come from? What happens after death? Why are we here? These are deep, important questions. But religion offers answers without evidence, and then asks us to stop looking. It hands you a book and says, everything you need is here. But critical thinking never stops at one book. It asks, what else is out there? What if this is wrong? What do we actually know? The more we learn through science and history, the more we see how religions reflect the culture and ignorance of the time they came from. Ancient people didn't understand disease, weather, or death. So, they created gods to explain it all. Lightning became a sign of anger. Illness was punishment. Natural disasters were divine wrath. These ideas made sense before we had microscopes and meteorology. But now, we know better. We know what causes earthquakes and plagues. Yet the stories remain untouched by evidence. That's not a sign of truth. It's a sign of stagnation. No belief should be immune to scrutiny. Yet religion is treated like a sacred cow, untouchable, even when it contradicts itself. Take the idea of a loving God who also creates eternal punishment. How can unconditional love include infinite torture? That isn't logic. It's fear-based control. If any other belief system said, believe this or suffer forever, we'd call it psychological abuse. But religion has normalized it. Questioning that contradiction is critical thinking. Accepting it without question is indoctrination. Some people say religion gives people morality, but morality existed long before religion, and it continues to evolve without it. We don't avoid murder because of commandments. We avoid it because we understand harm. We don't help others because of rewards. We help because of empathy. Morality comes from understanding, not obedience. And critical thinking helps us understand better. It doesn't need threats or bribes to do what's right. When we stop asking questions, we lose more than curiosity. We lose freedom. Religion often teaches obedience, not exploration. It says, here are the rules. Follow them. It doesn't matter where they came from or whether they make sense. Just obey. But critical thinking doesn't obey. It investigates. It adapts. It revises. It accepts being wrong. Religion punishes doubt. Thinking encourages it. That's why they can't coexist. It's not that all religious people avoid thinking. Many wrestle with doubts. But the system itself isn't built for questioning. It's built for repeating. That's why many believers only start questioning when something breaks, the system fails them, or they face something the answers don't explain. And when they finally ask hard questions, the answers crumble. Not because they want them to, but because they were never strong to begin with. Religions also contradict each other. They can't all be true. Some say there's one God, others say thousands. Some promise heaven, others promise reincarnation. Some ban meat, others wine, others pork. If one is right, the rest must be wrong. But they all use the same reasoning: personal experience, sacred texts, tradition. That's not a recipe for truth. That's a recipe for confusion. If critical thinking were applied, these contradictions would be exposed instantly. Yet, billions of people live within them, rarely questioning. And let's not forget how religion resists change. When science finds new evidence, it changes its theories. When religion is challenged, it defends tradition. Galileo was silenced for saying the earth moved. He wasn't defying facts. He was defying the church. And that's still happening. Evolution is taught in schools, yet some religious groups fight it. Not because the science is weak, but because it contradicts a book. When a book outweighs evidence, we are no longer thinking, we're surrendering. Even prayer is revealing. People pray to different gods for opposite things. Athletes on both sides pray to win. Victims and attackers both pray for protection. When the outcome is random, we call it chance. When it fits our wish, we call it divine. That's not evidence, that's bias. If prayer worked consistently, hospitals would track results. Insurance companies would reward believers, but they don't, because it doesn't. Yet, people believe because they want to. And belief without evidence is the opposite of critical thinking. Faith is often described as a virtue, but it's the only virtue that asks us not to think. You wouldn't hire a pilot who flies by faith. You wouldn't trust a doctor who guesses. Yet, people base their eternal worldview on faith alone. That's not noble. That's dangerous, especially when those beliefs influence laws, education, and human rights. When critical thinking is silenced, bad ideas go unchecked, and religion, more than anything, fears being checked. One of the most obvious signs that religion can't survive critical thinking is how heavily it relies on early indoctrination. Children are taught religious stories before they can reason through them. They're told what to believe before they even understand what belief means. And by the time they develop the ability to think critically, their worldview is already framed by myths they were never allowed to question. That's not education. That's programming. If someone said they believed in unicorns, we'd ask for evidence. If they said they based their entire life on the teachings of unicorns, we'd want something more than a storybook. But when religious people do the same with talking snakes or virgin births, it's protected by culture. It's immune to ridicule, not because it makes sense, but because it's sacred. That's a shield against thinking. not a result of it. Look at how religions respond to new knowledge. When astronomy showed that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, it didn't just correct an error, it threatened a whole theology. When Darwin showed how species evolve without divine guidance, it didn't just change biology, it challenged creation myths. When neuroscience revealed how thoughts, emotions, and consciousness arise from the brain, it didn't just update medicine, it eroded the soul narrative. These weren't attacks on religion, they were simply discoveries. But religion treats discovery like rebellion. Every time a new truth emerges, religion is forced to retreat, not by choice, but by pressure. It used to claim the Earth was 6,000 years old. Now, many believers try to reinterpret that. It used to deny evolution entirely. Now, some try to merge it with divine guidance. But these shifts don't come from within religion. They come from outside, through evidence, reasoning, and the relentless work of critical minds. Religion changes, not because it leads inquiry, but because it lags behind it. Then there's the issue of holy books, written in ancient times, filled with contradictions, and often morally questionable. Yet they are treated as perfect. The Bible, the Quran, the Torah, each is said to be the word of a supreme being. But if you open any of them and read without bias, you find strange laws, cruel punishments, and endless rules that make little sense today. Kill those who work on the Sabbath. Stone women who are not virgins on their wedding night. Avoid mixing fabrics. If these commands were found in any modern book, they'd be dismissed as nonsense. But within religion, they're called holy. Critical thinking asks, who wrote this? When? Why? And does it reflect truth or tribal custom? Religion doesn't want those questions. It wants reverence, not reflection. That's why questioning sacred texts is often seen as heresy. Not because the questions are unfair, but because they expose the human fingerprints all over what's claimed to be divine. Religions also make claims about the universe that have been proven wrong. They say the stars were made for us, that Earth is the center of creation, that the universe was built in days. Yet, science shows we live on a tiny planet, orbiting an average star in one galaxy among trillions. We are not at the center of anything. That doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it astonishing. But religion often rejects this view because it removes the special status it once promised. Critical thinking embraces our smallness. Religion resists it. Even in modern times, when information is everywhere, religion depends on isolation to survive. In many places, questioning faith openly is punished, dissented, doubt is shamed, and thinking for yourself is discouraged. Not because leaders are afraid of losing you to reason, but because they know reason is contagious. One question leads to another, and before long the whole structure starts to shake. The fear of questioning is not unique to any one faith. It's a trait of all rigid ideologies, but religion codifies that fear into its core. It tells you that doubt is sin, that thinking too hard is dangerous, that truth is already known, and your job is to accept it. But that's not how truth works. Truth survives questioning. It welcomes challenge. Only lies fear being asked to prove themselves. Religion also promotes a false certainty. It claims to know what happens after death, what a God wants, and what is morally absolute. But these aren't discoveries. They're declarations. No evidence, no method, just claims. And when critical thinking steps in and asks, "How do you know this?" there's no answer, only tradition, authority, and fear. That's not knowledge, that's control. Even the emotional appeal of religion breaks down under critical thinking. People often say they feel God's presence, but feelings are not facts. We feel things during music, during grief, during meditation. That doesn't mean a divine being is involved. It means the human brain is complex and responsive. People see visions during seizures, hear voices under stress. None of that proves the supernatural. It only proves that the mind can be tricked. And if we don't question those experiences, we end up mistaking biology for belief. Religious rituals often serve to reinforce group identity, not truth. They create belonging, repetition, shared purpose. But repetition isn't evidence. Chanting a belief doesn't make it real. And groupthink isn't proof. It's a way to silence dissent. Critical thinking disrupts this. It asks, why do we do this? Does it make sense? That's why rituals are often kept sacred, because analysis would expose their emptiness. And then there's the problem of selective morality. Religious texts are often cherry-picked. Followers highlight verses about love and kindness, but ignore the ones about violence, misogyny, and slavery. They say that was metaphorical, or that was cultural. But if parts of the book are immoral, and others are good, who decides? And if morality requires us to filter scripture through modern values, then we don't need scripture at all. We're already using reason to decide what's right. Critical thinking doesn't rely on authority. It relies on reason, consistency, and evidence. Religion relies on authority. It says, believe because this book says so, because this prophet said so, because this tradition says so. But when you strip away the robes, the temples, the rituals, what's left is a set of claims. And if those claims can't be tested, supported, or revised, they don't deserve special protection. The more people are exposed to critical thinking, the more religion loses its grip. That's why secular education is seen as a threat in many religious societies. That's why science is mistrusted. That's why independent thought is punished. Because it doesn't take hatred to dismantle religion. It only takes honesty. Once people are allowed to ask questions freely, the answers reveal themselves. Many religious institutions claim to value truth, but only within the limits they define. Step outside those limits, and you're accused of betrayal, not of morality, not of kindness, but of questioning the wrong things. That's how you know the system isn't built to seek truth. It's built to preserve itself. Think about how religion defines doubt. It's not curiosity. It's not bravery. It's often framed as weakness or even evil. People are told that if they question their faith, they're opening themselves to corruption. But doubt is not corruption. It's the beginning of learning. Every scientific discovery began with someone doubting what they were told. Every moral revolution started with someone saying, "This doesn't feel right." But religion teaches that questioning your beliefs is dangerous, even sinful. That's not education. That's fear-based loyalty. And when you compare how religion treats its claims with how we treat any other serious idea, the difference becomes obvious. If someone told you they had a cure for cancer, you wouldn't take it on faith. You'd ask for studies, results, peer review. You'd want to know what tests had been done. But when someone claims they know the creator of the universe, or the purpose of life, or what happens after death, we're told it's offensive to question it. That's the double standard critical thinking refuses to accept. Some believers will say, "My religion encourages thinking," but what they often mean is, "You can think within the boundaries we've set. You're allowed to explore, but not too far. You can ask questions, but only the ones that won't lead you out." That's not real thinking. That's intellectual house arrest. Critical thinking doesn't place those boundaries. It says, follow the argument wherever it leads, and if it leads away from your original belief, then that belief must be left behind. That's the cost of honesty. Religion, on the other hand, says the conclusion is fixed. Now work backward to justify it. That's not truth-seeking. That's rationalization. The harder you think, the less space religion has to hide. It survives on vague answers, metaphors stretched too far, and the insistence that truth doesn't need to be questioned. But when we examine those answers, when we ask, "How do you know this?" the facade starts to break, and the defense always falls back on feelings. I just know. I feel God in my heart. I had a personal experience. But feelings are not facts. People feel a lot of things: fear, comfort, awe, and often attribute them to whatever idea they've been taught. A Muslim feels something in prayer and calls it Allah. A Christian feels it and says, it's Jesus. A Hindu might say it's Shiva. The feeling is real, but the interpretation is learned. Critical thinking makes us ask, could I be wrong? Religion often tells us we must never ask that. Another sign that religion doesn't survive thinking is how it handles disagreement. In science, disagreement is welcomed. It leads to progress. If someone finds a better theory, we celebrate it. But religion treats disagreement as a threat, not just to the belief, but to the community, to the family, to the soul. It isolates those who doubt. It pressures them to conform. It creates guilt for asking questions. That's not how you protect truth. That's how you protect power. And that power is rarely passive. Religion influences laws, education, healthcare, and human rights. It decides who can marry, who can lead, who can speak, and it often does so not based on reason or evidence, but on old texts and ancient customs. When critical thinking challenges those decisions, it's not just a debate. It's a risk to the institution's control, and that's why thinking is often treated like rebellion. But rebellion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as a child asking, why? Why can't women be priests? Why does a loving God allow suffering? Why do different religions contradict each other? Why does belief matter more than behavior? These aren't disrespectful questions. They're the start of clarity. But religion often has no honest answers, only circular logic, because it's God's will, because it's written, because you must have faith. That's not thinking, that's deflection. One of the most powerful tools of critical thinking is the ability to say, I don't know. It's a sign of intellectual humility. But religion rarely says that. It gives answers, even when it has no evidence. It claims certainty in areas where uncertainty is honest. It says, we know when in truth no one does. And that false certainty keeps people from exploring further, from wondering, from learning. Critical thinking, on the other hand, thrives on not knowing. It says, let's find out. It allows us to change our minds when new information arrives. Religion punishes that. It praises consistency even when it's wrong. But what kind of virtue is it to never change, even when faced with better evidence? And then there's the question of exclusivity. Most religions claim to be the one true path, but they all use the same methods to reach that conclusion. They all have sacred texts. They all have prophets. They all have rituals, stories, and traditions, and they all say the others are mistaken. Critical thinking sees that and asks, if they all claim the same authority, how do we tell who's right? Religion says, trust us. Critical thinking says, let's compare, let's test, let's stay open to being wrong. That's why religion can't survive it. Because the moment you apply the same standards you use for everything else, science, history, ethics to religion, it fails. Not because it's being attacked, but because it was never built to withstand questioning. Another way to see the conflict is to look at what religion fears most. Not violence, not ridicule, but irrelevance. When people stop believing, not because they were forced to, but because they quietly stopped finding it convincing, religion loses its grip, and it knows this. That's why so many religious groups invest so much in controlling education, censoring books, rewriting history, and demonizing doubt. They know that thinking freely leads people away, not because they're being led astray, but because they're being led to clarity. There's a reason why the more educated a population becomes, the less religious it tends to be. It's not arrogance. It's not rebellion. It's exposure. When people learn how to think for themselves, they see that myths don't hold up, that stories from ancient times don't explain modern reality, that we don't need invisible beings to make sense of the world anymore. We need tools. We need evidence. We need open minds. And the data reflects that. In the most secular countries, places like Sweden, Japan, Norway, and the Netherlands, there are lower rates of violent crime, greater gender equality, higher literacy, and stronger human rights protections. Religion is not the root of morality. If anything, as it fades, human cooperation, reason, and empathy take its place. Some still argue that religion gives people hope, that without it, the world feels empty. But that's not a flaw in critical thinking. That's a discomfort with truth. It's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to feel small in a vast universe. But believing something just because it's comforting is not a reason to call it true. Comfort is not the measure of reality, and truth doesn't owe us reassurance. There's meaning to be found without superstition. There's awe in understanding how stars form, how life evolves, how minds think. There's purpose in helping others, in building knowledge, in leaving the world better than we found it. These aren't divine gifts. They're human efforts, and they don't require faith, just intention, honesty, and thought. Some will say that critical thinking leads to arrogance, that it makes people believe they know everything. But it's the opposite. Thinking critically means admitting how much we don't know. It means letting go of absolute answers and learning to live with uncertainty. That's not weakness, that's courage. It's much easier to cling to a simple story than to accept complexity. But complexity is where truth lives. And when you stop being afraid of asking questions, something changes. Religion no longer feels necessary, not because you've rejected it emotionally, but because it becomes irrelevant. It stops being your default explanation. It stops being your moral compass. It becomes one more idea among many, one that doesn't withstand scrutiny. You don't need to hate religion to move beyond it. You just need to think about it the same way you think about everything else. Ask where the ideas come from. Ask what evidence supports them. Ask whether the claims can be tested. If the answers aren't good enough, then it's time to let them go. That's the quiet revolution that critical thinking creates. Not with protest or slogans, but with curiosity. With one person at a time asking, "Is this really true?" And often quietly, the answer comes back, "No." Not because they're bitter, not because they're lost, but because they're honest enough to look closer. Religion can't survive in that kind of environment. Not because people become cruel, but because they become clear. In the end, it's not reason that's in conflict with faith. It's clarity. Clarity is the enemy of dogma. It replaces superstition with understanding. It replaces fear with inquiry. It replaces obedience with integrity. And once people begin to think clearly, the spell breaks. The stories lose their grip, and the mind is free. Not free to believe nothing, but free to believe what's supported, what's coherent, what earns its place through evidence, not authority. That's why religion can't survive critical thinking. Because critical thinking doesn't destroy, it reveals. It doesn't mock, it investigates. And when you truly investigate religion, what you find is not eternal truth, but a patchwork of myths, rules, and rituals passed down through time, protected by fear and preserved by habit. But you don't need habit. You need truth, and truth doesn't need to be sacred. It only needs to be real. Thanks for staying with me through this journey of thought. If something in this made you pause, made you question, or made you feel a little more clear, then it was worth it. You don't need all the answers. You just need the courage to keep asking the right questions. That's how progress happens. Quietly, honestly, one thought at a time. See you in the next one. Music.